Welcome, everyone. It's exciting to see this many people interested in seed saving. My name is Melissa Moran, and my husband and I were the co-owners of an organic heirloom CSA up in upstate New York in Rome. And I love talking about food and the seed supply and what's going on with food production here. So I'm no Larkin Rose. I've heard some charismatic speakers here at PorcFest, but I'll try to do my best to keep you guys engaged. We grew 115 varieties of heirloom produce on our farm, and that included produce, flowers, and herbs. We did a lot of that because we felt like seeds are more than just something you pick up at the dollar store and kind of chuck in the ground and hope that something viable comes out of it. We're really looking to preserve and regain the kind of variety that our ancestors were used to and we no longer have today, because in the last 80 years we've actually lost 93% of the varieties of most of the things that you would pick up in the grocery store. Have so many different varieties that you've never seen. Green beans can be purple, they can be white with purple spots, they can be yellow. There are so many different colors and flavors. The problem is they don't transport for thousands of miles. So what you have is people that are turning our seed production into commodity and really a commercialization and streamlining of our seed lines just to be based on transportation so that they can ship it from Chile, they can ship it from Mexico, they can ship it from China. So flavor and variety has really been lost. So for us, the catalyst for my seed saving interest was that notion that we used to grow 383 varieties of cucumber in America, and now in the grocery store you're going to get about 3 or 4 varieties. So that was a real problem for me. And now what I wanted to do is explain to everyone how you can start saving your own seeds, because it's super easy. And not only is it easy, but we all know how economically viable it is to not rely on someone else for something as basic as your own food supply. So in addition to it being cheap, it's great because you're not relying on the commercial production of these seeds, which also, when you're purchasing seeds from a supplier, which there is nothing wrong with for sure, but when you're looking at buying seeds, you're looking at buying seeds from someone who's been contracted by that seed company to grow seed stock. They're not going to be regionally adapted to your soil, your climate. It's just going to be a broad-based seed. So if you want something that can be really specific to your area, really specific to your growing needs, and prevent a lot of these problems of crop failures and diversity issues. I know for us on the farm, we grew close to 15 varieties of tomato, and we had a real problem with one tomato in particular, which was a Roma variety, that didn't set very well. And if we had only grown that type of tomato, our clients would have been really bummed out by our tomato production. But instead, we had so many varieties that the other ones picked up for that. And that's really something that goes and for the average home producer, you're not going to grow 15 varieties of tomato. But just growing 2 or 3, if you have one that majorly fails, chances are, unless it's a problem with your soil, you'll still be able, a lot of these varieties are just not produced in the area that you came from, and some of them just aren't geared up for that. Let's see. What I wanted to do is talk a little bit about the definition of what seeds are. It can get a little hairy because definitions have changed over the years. I want to talk about the difference between open-pollinated, hybrid, and GMO seeds, because I think there's still a little bit of confusion amongst the general population about what those terms mean. Open-pollinated means that the pollination is occurring by something in nature, whether it be wind or bugs or roadside traffic, honestly, insects, bats, birds, animals eating it and pooping it out later. Oh. But basically, hybrid means that it was an intentional cross-pollination over several generations. And the problem, I know a lot of people think you can't save hybrid seeds, which is not true. The problem that comes with saving hybrid seeds comes from figuring out what parent is going to show up dominantly. You can still save hybrid seeds, but unless you know what strains were involved in the creation of the hybrid, you're probably going to get something a little bit different from the parent plant, which may or may not be a problem for you. But it's just a risk you're going to run by saving hybrid seeds. Sometimes you'll run across classes of hybrids, like an F1, and that actually means first filial generation. It means it's the first version of that plant to hit the market. So you'll see sometimes an F2 and an F3. That's what that means, in case anyone was curious. Now, the difference between a hybrid and genetically modified is that genetically modified is never going to occur in nature. You'll find hybrids in nature all the time. If you grow 2 different varieties of spinach and they both blossom at the same time and you save seeds from it, you're going to have a hybrid eventually. It may not show up in all of your seeds, but there will likely be some cross-pollination occurring. So hybrids in nature are actually fairly natural, and they are the result of either natural or forced genetic manipulation, but not between species that are not related, which is what genetically modified organisms are. It's taking a fish gene and inserting into a tomato. It's not going to happen in nature. It's kind of like the difference between breeding a lab with a poodle and breeding a lab with a goldfish. And they're not viable. And I personally don't see any value in saving those seeds, especially with the likelihood of the Terminator genes being present in it. But for those who are really anti-IP, I suppose there could be some value in saving genetically modified seeds as a protest movement. So pollination of your plants. This is important when you're talking about seed saving because you need to know how your plants are being generated. So there's 2 types of pollination as it relates to seed production, and that's self-pollination, which is when a plant will set fruit regardless of there being any presence of wind or bugs or outside forces. And those will be things like your legume family and tomatoes. Nightshades, they will all set fruit whether there's a bug present or not. So everyone that thinks like, well, there's no bees on my tomatoes, well, they don't need it. If you're trying to preserve genetic purity, that's actually in your best interest. But tomatoes, beans, peas, all those things will set fruit with no help. Then there's cross-pollinators, which, like I said before, requires the use of bugs or wind to assist in the pollination process. Genetic purity, for those looking to really maintain a specific variety, is going to require isolation. You can't grow 2 different varieties of tomatoes together and save seeds and think that they'll be like the parent plant, because chances are you're going to have an insect that's going to hop from flower to flower, because insects don't know that tomatoes are self-pollinating and they don't care. So you'll end up with crosses, and for something like a tomato, you're going to need at least 500 yards between varieties in order to not have a cross-pollination. So for the average home gardener, it's really not practical, but it's also not as important in terms of functional seeds. You'll still have very functional seeds. It just may be like a combination of the varieties that you're growing. The problems occur in crops that are bred for either storage ability or for color. So if you're growing a red cabbage and you're growing a Napa cabbage together and they both seed out at the same time, which is unlikely because they are biennials, which I'll get into. But if you're breeding them at the same time for seeds, then you could end up with a slightly red Napa cabbage or a slightly fanned out red cabbage in the future if you choose to save the seeds and grow them near each other. For crops like corn, this is more problematic because corn varieties tend to be similar when they tassel out And what that means is when the corn sends up tassels, it's the pollen for the corn ears, and it sets on the silk. When you grow a corn variety that's made for shelling or drying, like a hard blue corn or popcorn, and you grow it, it's say the average is a 100-day corn, and you grow a sweet corn that's a 98-day corn. Well, they're probably going to tassel out at the same time, and what you'll end up with is either a really mealy sweet corn or a really poorly drying shell corn. So you don't want to grow varieties of corn next to each other that have similar day lengths. And you can space it out. There's a lot of really early sweet corn varieties, so you could get a 60-day sweet corn and a 100-day drying corn and grow them right next to each other and never have a cross-pollination issue. This is actually one thing that makes me a little bit less fanatical about the idea of, and I hate saying this because I really am adamantly against GMOs, but people that have to live near conventional corn growers who are growing GMO corn, you can still grow corn. In my opinion, the best way to go about it is to go to your neighbor, because I don't know if you guys know old-timey farmers, but they love shooting the shit, and they will go, if you ask them what they're growing, just as a general question, and you can, even if you just get a name of the corn variety, you can go home and Google it, find out how many days it is, and ask him when he starts planting, and then do the math from there. Say, okay, he's gonna plant that at the end of May. I'm gonna need 90 days past that. So all you have to do is be able to plant before or after. If you miss the tasseling out period, you will not have cross-pollination issues. So for anyone who does want to continue growing corn and try to produce more heirloom varieties, but really do live within that buffer zone, because for crops like corn, you actually need about a mile or 2 miles minimum as a buffer zone to prevent cross-pollination if you're just going to purely try and keep it separated altogether. And that's really impractical for a lot of people, especially people that are kind of rural but not really rural. So all the people that are on the outskirts trying to grow gardens next to some big dairy farm that's growing 100 acres of GMO corn, I can understand the frustration. So that's one thing you could do to combat it. But the problem with hand-pollinating a cross-pollinating crop, say you want to maintain the genetic purity of your sweet corn, and you don't want it to cross with anything else, so you take the measures to hand-pollinate your corn. Say you only have a few stalks, but you just really want to keep it as a seed stock corn. Well, you can get what's called homozygosity, which is a sameness, when you only collect seeds from one plant, and it's kind of a dangerous thing. And in order to prevent homozygosity, which creates weaker plants after several generations, you just need to save seeds from more than one plant. Because in a seed pack, you're likely getting seeds from many, many different plants, and so you're not looking at the same parent variety. So if you're trying to keep a variety that would normally be pollinated by bugs and needs that kind of spreading around of genetic material a little bit more, save seeds from multiple plants. That's your best bet, so that you don't end up, it's known as, the technical term is inbreeding depression, and you see it a lot in corn. Sometimes it takes several generations to show up where you really end up with weak, stunted plants or just really poor growth or poor yields. But sometimes you also can get it right off the bat. So it's just best to save from multiple plants. And you can prevent unwanted cross-pollination of seeds by using a physical barrier. Something like a row cover will handle most of your typical garden plants. Maybe not so practical for corn unless you're doing a high tunnel, but row covers do a really good job on things like your greens, your lettuces, cabbages, sometimes tomatoes. You can do all those things, peppers, and certainly squash. And you can also use hedgerows and tree windbreaks. But like I said, if you're trying to bank on the wind not blowing through and you live next to someone who's growing a lot already, it's kind of a dicey move. But distance is really impractical for people that are doing home gardening because a 200-yard minimum is required for anything grown that is a cross-pollinator, that insects are going to be pollinating, things like spinach. And like I said, it's a mile based on wind-pollinated crops like corn. So it's really a distant thing, and you'd have to know everyone who's growing near you within a mile radius, and it's just not practical. But it'll really increase the diversity if people really start growing some of this stuff on their own for saving. So what do you look for when you're selecting a plant for seed? Well, it depends on what you're going for. You want to think about what the job of the plant is, say spinach or leafy greens. What you want to save the seeds from is the last plant to go to seed. I know everyone kind of gets really excited about, harvesting everything first and, getting that stuff out there. But sometimes that's a problem. It's not a problem for greens. In fact, you want to start harvesting and wait till the very last plant starts shooting up, and then you can save seeds from that. Because you want to encourage that longevity in the seed line. So you don't want to take seeds from the plant that bolts first, because then you're going to be looking at encouraging plants that will start bolting early. And it's common sense stuff, but it's something that you probably don't think about, especially when you're growing things like tomatoes, where you're really excited, you grab that first tomato. But tomato is something you do want to grow early. You want to develop early, and you want to have early harvest. That's why they have, early girl and the hybrids that perform early. So you do want to save some of those early seeds as well. The one thing you want to do is taste what you're eating. So what you want to do is taste that tomato. Before you save the seeds from it, just because it produced first, make sure it's the taste, it performs the function you want. If it's a sauce tomato, make sure it's nice and firm. Make sure there's very little material that's the gel inside. Really look at what you want that tomato to be doing before you save the seeds from it. Same goes for a nice big slicing tomato. Sometimes the first one, it depends on if it was just rainy, if you had a big swelling. You want to taste it and make sure it's not waterlogged and not the kind of tomato that you want to produce next year. Make sure it's that's what I want to grow next year. So you just want to think about what the point is behind what you're saving for. Now things like eggplant, you've got to consider how long a plant takes to produce seed. Well, everyone knows that things like cucumbers, you pick them off the vine and there's already seeds produced. Well, there's a difference between horticulturally ready and genetically ready for seed production. And they're different things. Horticulturally ready corn is going to be nice and flavorful and sweet. If you're saving sweet corn for seed, you're going to let it go to dent, which means that the top's literally dent in, it's already drying on the stalk. So you're not going to pick it when it's ready to be eaten and dry that out and save it for seed. So you just need to think about the kind of purpose that it's going to be for. Eggplant's another one. In fact, eggplant will fall off the plant itself before it's ready. The plant will look rotten and disgusting. That's when you save the seeds. You don't want to pull a nice big ripe eggplant off the plant and cut it open and seed it, because those seeds won't be viable. They're not mature at that point. Things like cucumbers can be seeded directly off the plant when they are at horticultural readiness, and so can tomatoes, and let's think of another common one. Squash, winter squash, not summer. Summer squash, you want them to be the giant baseball-sized zucchini, 3 feet long, and the seeds are like this. That's when you want zucchini. But you can save seeds from the smaller, more edible plants and have them produce, because if you've ever grown zucchini, you know that you have a really hard time killing it, and that's why, because the seeds are very viable no matter what you do to them. And some seeds are very forgiving, so it's worth it to try it and get your hands in there and feel around, see if anything. You can save the seeds from literally anything. It's just a matter of the growing conditions. And that's something else that people would like to probably know more about is seed saving conditions. What are you looking for the conditions to save them in? A lot of people don't know how long seeds are viable for. You think, oh, these were last year's seeds, chuck them, they're no good. That's not true, and it might be true for a couple of varieties, but not very many. You can actually save seeds between 5 and 10 years and still have them be fairly productive seed stock. The rule of thumb is that the bigger the seed, the longer they last. However, that's not entirely true, and there's a lot of exceptions. But the smaller the seed, the shorter the lifespan. So you're looking at 2-3 years versus potentially 10 plus. And things like onions, even though they're bigger than other seeds, they tend to really have a poor germination rate after about 2-3 years. So that's a really common one that you would want to be aware of not lasting for very long. But really all seeds need to do to be storage worthy is watch out for the humidity and the temperature. And if you can keep them relatively dry and relatively cool, your seeds will be viable for a long time. And if you can do even better than that, deep freezing your seeds is really good and necessary for some varieties like lavender needs striation and needs that freezing period. It needs to feel like it went dormant before it'll germinate again. So there's a few varieties like that you would want to be aware of. And what I really want to do is open this up to questions, because I know I could talk about saving different seed varieties, but I know how spread out everyone is, and the varieties that maybe you can grow are going to be way different than what you can grow. And I'd like to be able to answer questions from people that can grow a big range of things more than me just saying tomatoes and squash and corn, because I know that's not what everyone wants to be saving. So if you have any questions on seed saving, I'd love to answer those. And if anyone has, yeah. Oh, I've been told that, yep, because it sounds like I'm talking to myself yeah, if anyone has questions, please.
I've been gardening for quite a few years, but I'm just getting to seed saving. Are there good references to tell you when and how to save which kinds of?
I brought this with me. I bought, my best friend from back home in Maine and we went to California to the National Heirloom Seed Expo, and I bought this book. It's called The Complete Guide to Saving Seeds by Robert Gow and Cheryl Moore, and it's 322 different varieties, and I'll have this here and anyone can feel free to look at it. And I read it on the flight home, and it's incredibly detailed, like beyond my own scope of understanding of botany, because I've never attempted to collect seeds from trees and shrubs, but it goes into deciduous woody plants and herbs, anything from common gardening things to really exotic kind of stuff. And I would really recommend this book to anyone that gets serious about saving seeds. It's incredibly useful. There are a lot of online forums as well. I believe Seed Savers has a lot of references on their website for instructions on how to save different varieties as well. But if you're looking for something that you can tangibly hold and kind of hang on to rather than just clicking through pages and hoping that one of them appeals to you, this is a really great book.
Hi, we've had this new novelty in our supermarket, which is you can get little sweet peppers of all different colors in the same bag, and we just love them. And what would we have to do can we like save the seeds from those things that we buy in the supermarket and plant those?
I would guess, I have actually seen those as well. And because they are fully colored, that means they're not baby pepper plants, because peppers will produce green until they are ripe enough to turn another color. So the size is I would guess that they are a hybrid, so you may end up having to save several seeds from several of those plants and try and find ones that still end up the miniature version. I'm sure you'll end up with some other parent plants where you end up with some regular sized bells, but you could definitely try it. And what you would do is, once those plants start producing fruit, look for the ones that are going to be the smallest, let those go to seed and save those. You can take the seeds of peppers when they are at the horticulturally ready stage, so you can cut them open right out of the grocery store and save a couple of them if they have seeds in them. Some hybrid plants, the seeds are not very well developed, but if you get some, should definitely try it. I know that there's one guy out there right now who, I don't know if you know that bananas that you get in the grocery store, they used to have seeds. And so there's one man who is actually going through and saving banana seeds when he finds one in a banana and trying to regenerate like old banana varieties, because I guess there's huge problems down south. And so it would be really worth it to try and save even hybrid seeds, in my opinion, because I think it's fun to mess around with plant genetics on that kind of level. Plus, it's really neat to see what you can get from those things. So it'd be worth your time, I think, especially if you really enjoy those small peppers.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello. What's the easiest way to save tomato seeds? And I have not had good luck with organic food seeds from the grocery store. So do you remember?
From the grocery store, you said?
Yeah, the organic from the grocery store. I've not had good luck.
Okay, well, I'll start with your first one, which is how to save tomato seeds. There's a couple of different ways that I've seen suggested. I'll tell you the one that I use personally, because the other ones that I've seen, I haven't personally tried, because if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But what I do is I take canning jar, like small jelly jars, or any junk jar, honestly. I just have a million canning jars. And I label what tomato I'm putting in that plant. I scoop out all the seeds, just the seeds, no pulp. Put it in the jar with about 2 inches of water, and I let it get disgusting. It will grow mold on the top, and you let it sit about 3-4 days at room temperature, and that gel coating will fall off of the seeds. You give the jar one good shake on day 4, all the seeds will sink to the bottom, and then you can just strain off the scum on the top, and then you will have seeds that you can put right down onto paper towels and have them dry out for you without them being stuck together like you get when the seed coat is still on there and you try and stick it on a paper towel, because then you end up planting a lot of paper towel, and the germination rate's not as good. But the jar method works for me. I've also seen, in fact, this book suggests that for tomato seed saving, you can also rub the seeds with a fine grit sand, and that will remove the gel coating as well. But I feel like that would just end up with a lot of grit in your seeds. But it's apparently a popular method. As for your second question of organic foods from the grocery store not producing viable seeds, it's probably because unfortunately, with things the way they are, we're still shipping a lot of organic foods from really far away, as far as China even, and Chinese organics, dodgy, but you're also getting plants that are picked before horticultural readiness. So they will ripen over the course of being shipped 5,000 miles, but the seeds are not produced in that time. They're picking them too young for the seeds to really mature. So that's probably the problem you're running into. And that could be remedied. If you have any sort of farmer's market nearby, you're going to get the freshest organic produce, and you can probably save seeds from something like that a lot more readily than you can from something from the grocery store.
Yeah, when you save seeds, and if you put them in like a vacuum sealer bag, or if you put them in just a mason jar, does it matter if you've pulled the oxygen? Like, they don't have any oxygen basically if you put them in a vacuum sealer bag. Does that matter?
The oxygen doesn't so much matter. It's the humidity, in fact, because you can save some seeds without removing the oxygen just fine. But what you might want to do is use the desiccant, what are they, like the little beads that you can find in shoe boxes that come with a pair of shoes. Those are actually reusable, and the measurement that you would use if you're going to pack desiccants into your seeds to reduce moisture is you want to use an equal weight to the amount of seeds being saved. So if you're saving 5 grams of seed, put in 5 grams of desiccant. So that will remove the moisture content for you. And they also, if you're not familiar with how to reuse them, they sell color changing ones where once they're saturated with moisture, they actually change color and you'll know that you need to dry them out, and you can actually dry them right out in your oven. I think the temperature is like 200 or I'll have to check. It's either 200 or 230 degrees, but if you put them in the oven for an hour at that really low temperature, it'll dry out your stuff and you can reuse them right again. So it's worth it. I've bought the colored ones before, so. Any other questions? Yeah.
Hi. I know that some seeds that you buy nowadays are pelletized, so they're easier to plant because, you know, the seeds are so small. Is there a natural way to do that?
To do it on, that's
Yourself?
tough. The pelleted seeds usually have some form of, well, the organic ones, I'm not sure what the conventional pelleted seeds consist of, but the organic ones usually have a liquefied clay coating on them, and they roll those through drum rollers, and I wouldn't know how to do that on a home scale. But they also have, Johnny's Select Seeds makes these, I'm sure everyone actually makes them, I just happen to have bought some from them, these small little hand seeders that you can like just up and down motion, and you never have to touch the seeds with your hand, and it will still deliver the same amount of seeds per flat or per seed hole, whatever you're doing. And those work really well for those really small seeds like cabbage seeds and really tiny stuff. And you can adjust on, there's a little dial with opening sizes that will place the right amount depending on what size seed you're handling. That might be something you'd want to look into. Anybody else? All right. Well, thank you for letting me talk to you about seed saving, and I hope I answered some of your questions. And have a great rest of PorcFest.